So if anyone does have a chance to watch the documentary, it's meant to be very good. As I'm sure you all know, we all share a love of chocolate. I can already see that we have been helping ourselves to the chocolate before everyone got here. And this Easter, it's estimated that Britons will eat 80 million chocolate eggs without any idea of the true produce of them. So how much actually all the human trafficking that is involved in the production of the chocolate egg is ridiculous, and people are just not aware of it. And Ghana and Ivory Coast, which is where most of these problems are, produce 60% of the world's cocoa, so you can see that it's a very large. Most of the chocolate that you eat will actually, unfortunately, be tainted by the fact that it would have been human trafficking, particularly child labour. And in 2009, only 3% of the cocoa produced in the world was actually certified as free of abuses, including child labour, torture. So only 3% of the cocoa produced does not involve these human atrocities.
So this is kind of like the Oxfam slide, basically. You'll see that a lovely graphic up there that shows that unlike most commodities, chocolate is actually produced by mainly smallholders. So these are people who literally a family business on a small plot of land growing the cocoa. So it's kind of like, in a way, if you think of it like a food chain, they're at the bottom of it, and it goes through quite a few different alleyways and a few different hands before it gets to the big chocolate producers. So that's just something to bear in mind as to why there's so little control over it, really. So as you can see, 90% of the farms are smaller than 5 hectares, and this represents 90% of the world's cocoa. You can also see how many people are dependent on it. It's an industry that's a lifesaver. In Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, it's the predominant industry. They mainly export cocoa. If they didn't have cocoa, they'd be in a far worse situation.
We're now going to talk about Ali Diabate, who is a very famous case study of child labour. I don't know if any of you have actually heard of him. He was 11 years old when he was lured into Mali by a slave trader to go work on a farm in the Ivory Coast. And this is an example of human trafficking because he was lied to and then trafficked to the Ivory Coast. As you can see, there is West Africa.
Most of the kids that are trafficked into Côte d'Ivoire down here are from Mali. As you all know, Mali's been in the news loads recently. It has a very unstable political government, very unstable regime going on there, and also as a result a really bad economy. There's just not anything. The economy doesn't support the people that live there, and you can see why people would think that maybe Côte d'Ivoire was the land of opportunity, and it would be a good reason to send your kids there.
As I said, there was false promises behind the reason that they managed to get him into the Ivory Coast, because he was actually told that he would receive a bicycle, which is, there's lots of cases where people are doing things for bicycles in this area, but also that he would get his £150 for his parents, which was really important for him because his parents, they were very poor, and he felt that he could help them, and then he was trafficked into a horrible cocoa farm called Les Gros, which is a big man. And the life there was nothing like anyone had told him. He didn't receive a bike, he didn't receive any money.
Because if you think about it, what kind of parent would let their child be lured by a human trafficker and taken to a country miles away with vague promises? But it's quite a cultural thing in Mali and Côte d'Ivoire that people used to send their kids to other families, and they used to kind of do like work experience swaps, as it were. I guess that's how we would see it. So they would send their kids in the hope that they'd learn new skills, maybe to do with cocoa and everything, and be able to send maybe some money back to the family, and also bring those skills back with them. So the human traffickers are really taking advantage of a very entrenched cultural kind of aspect, I guess. So this is probably the site that most trafficked children would first see when they get into Ivory Coast. Kind of like a bus marketplace, as it were, where the cocoa farmers kind of congregate and pick up their children that they're going to buy off these people that just smuggle them across the border. It's just so horrific that such a horrible trade is out there in the open with people watching, and the fact that so little is being done about it.
This is the farmer who owned Les Gros, or Big Man, and this is him with his child labourers, which is a terrible picture because he looks very, well, I think he looks very smug and almost happy with what he's doing, which is disgusting. Also, you can see just how much they're expected. They're carrying logs on their heads. I don't think many of us could do that. It's not a nice thing for a child to have to do. And actually, in the case of Ali, he was about 4 feet tall when he first went. So the cocoa bags were actually bigger than him. So someone else had to put them onto his head. So the farmer would put them onto his head and make him walk because they were actually physically bigger than him. He was expected to work from 6 in the morning to 6:30 at night. And as you saw in the documentary trailer, if you didn't do that, you would be beaten. And they were staying in really appalling accommodation. They would beat them and if they fell over until they stood back up and lifted the bag. It was really horrific. And there's actually, we didn't want to show the picture because it was really quite scarring.
It was pretty awful, yeah.
But he actually had scars from so many scars. His back
all the way down his back.
From
actually.
The bike chain that he was beaten with, and cocoa tree branches are also used. Which I'm not sure if he's carrying something now. I can't see. It looks like he is carrying something.
Yeah, I don't know.
And they had to subsist on a few burnt bananas. That was all they had to eat. So the conditions there, I don't think anyone can appreciate how horrific they are. I mean, even just looking at that picture, you can see how the children, it's not a good place to be.
Yeah, so obviously it's horrific work for a man, a fully grown man, but for kids it's horrendous. And they're just expected to do so much, and they're literally carrying the cocoa industry on their backs, and we just think it's really wrong, basically.
And you may ask, why didn't he escape? If you're in that condition, you might be tempted to try and escape. And actually, the reason that he didn't was he was too terrified to. He had experienced and seen many children try and escape, and when they came back, the situation was just 10 times worse. They were beaten sometimes to death, or beaten and made to work longer. So in some cases, in his mind, it seemed better to just put up with it than try and escape, most probably fail, and come back to worse conditions. The sad thing about this story is that it's not an extraordinary case. It's actually just one case study we chose that could be actually has similarities with many other children. But this one actually has a happy ending because the farmer, one of the boys did manage to escape, went to the village, told the authorities about the farmer, and they came and shut the farm down and actually made the farmer give him a bike and the money that he was promised. This was really good for Ali, obviously, but it's very sad because that is the only thing that makes this story extraordinary, is the fact that he had freedom. There are more 10 times more cases of children not being freed.
So where do we go from here, and what are the big chocolate companies doing about it? So as you can see, we've got names of chocolate bars that have all been certified by the Rainforest Alliance, Fairtrade, or the UTZ. And also some logos that you might recognise of all the companies that are actually doing something about this. Unfortunately, it's not all the chocolate companies. Has anyone heard of Mondelez International? No? So how they describe themselves is, we pour our hearts into creating snacks that treat, fuel and boost people worldwide. We have delicious chocolates, delectable cookies, flavourful gums, refreshing beverages, and it goes on and on and on until they sum it up that they bring a world of joy. So as you can see, you can probably recognise a couple of the letters they've used there. So Mondelez International, formerly known as Kraft, produces all of these wonderful treats that we eat in daily life. You might have noticed that Cadbury was on this slide and on the last slide as well. So Cadbury made a lot of progress in what it was doing to actually stop human trafficking. Then, famously, Kraft took it over in a hostile takeover, and since it's become part of the Mondelez family, nothing has been done. Including, is anyone munching on Toblerone? Actually, right now. Yeah, so Toblerone produced with the blood of human trafficked children. I think it's their new slogan.
So we wanted to hear from you. Who do you think is to blame for this problem? Do you think it's the farmers, the parents who send their children, the companies or actually us as consumers. So,
any views?
any ideas?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting talking about the parents, and I think that even if there are these cultural reasons why people in perhaps Mali and similar neighbouring countries to Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, where a lot of the cocoa production happens, I think any person, even with any kind of cultural reasons, would only send their child away to work out of desperation and poverty. And I think that addressing things like poverty in those countries and the instability in countries like Mali and their sort of almost famine that they're having at the moment and crisis would help, you know, some of the families who feel desperate enough to offer their children, even with sort of these fake promises, even thinking, oh, my son's going to go away and get a bike and get some money that he can bring back. Even if that was the case, like, that's still not a good thing. We wouldn't, condone that. We wouldn't think that.
I completely agree. I think they taking advantage of situations that they take advantage of the poverty because they know that they will reap what they want.
Yeah.
But that is also the point. So, like with the actual farmers, quite a few people actually blame the farmers. But
so as you can see, this is a constant. If you look at the pink line, it's constant prices. So it's adjusted for inflation, and it shows cocoa prices from the 70s to the present day. And as you can see, they're much lower and they're almost on a downward trend. This is The Economist in me. So do low cocoa prices drive farmers to use child labour? Do you think that's an excuse?
Not an excuse as such, but it's again like a contributing factor.
So does anyone think that anything could be done?
I think it's quite interesting because as students we like to buy cheap food, so it's quite a difficult one because as a consumer you don't want to spend more, but you have to spend more for the farmers to get more money.
It's like the argument that I don't know if anyone who came to the talk yesterday by Anti-Slavery who was saying about cotton farming and how the EU has this trade deal with Uzbekistan. Because basically they can buy cotton at a cheaper rate in Uzbekistan, but Uzbekistan is using child labourers, like as a state-run initiative. They're using child labourers to pick the cotton, but that's the cheapest cotton that the EU can buy. So it's sort of perpetuating the cycle, and I think that's a similar problem here.
But do you think that increasing the prices of chocolate, maybe regulating the market, will actually make any difference? I mean, once these farmers have discovered the wonders of cheap labour that is trafficked children, do you think that they won't, if the prices increase, they'll just kind of enjoy the increase in profits rather than actually do anything about it?
They're not going to pass on the money if they start making more money.
No, I think just because you charge more you won't be charging more at the source, you'll be charging more in the shop. It doesn't mean all that money will go towards employing new people. I mean, there's such a small amount of the money that you buy, that you spend on chocolate actually goes to the farmer and gets there.
Yeah.
That I think even if you raise chocolate by 40p a bar, farmers would probably still only get 1-2p extra a bar. So it wouldn't. But I think chocolate companies know we want cheap stuff, because they don't raise their prices on chocolate, but I've noticed they make chocolate bars smaller during the recession, so people will still go and buy it.
You never know, they might be just concerned about the whole
Absolutely.
obesity thing and putting on weight.
That's true.
That's
true.
Well, actually, that leads us quite well on to.
Why was there a massive spike in 72 or something? Or whatever that was.
70, 78 maybe? Yeah, I don't know.
I think it was the oil crisis.
So are farmers totally blameless then? Should we just let them carry on their merry way? Is there anything we can do about their behaviour?
No.
Anyone from further up?
Yeah.
I don't know, I really wish the companies would just pay the farmers more, or at least regulate what the farmers are doing. Because obviously these companies, especially people who own Cadbury, they must make tons and tons of money every year. So if they, I think they could probably afford to regulate who they're buying from and at least take some measures to make sure that slave labour by children isn't involved. I'm sure that they could do that.
I think the only trouble is, playing devil's advocate here, I do completely agree with you, but the argument that companies often use is that they don't, then a Nestle person, or not Nestle's good now, aren't they? A Toblerone person will go and won't actually go to the farm. That it is such a long chain before it actually gets to them, so it passes through so many hands. It's a similar thing with clothes, that Primark's really seen as bad because they more directly buy from these people, but actually if you trace it, Topshop and everyone, it all still comes from there, but it's more indirect. So even though I think it can be quite hard to regulate because there's such fluidity in the market and so many ways that it gets up, so many middlemen, so to speak.
But I think there is you could set a standard. Like when there was a big issue in the 80s and 90s, especially over conflict diamonds, there was a system in place called, I think it's called the Kimberley system, whereby if a diamond doesn't have this particular certificate to say this didn't come from a conflict zone, isn't a blood diamond, then shops like Tiffany's and loads of other jewellery chains wouldn't take it, and it became quite a well-known thing. Yeah. So that consumers knew that if they wanted to buy diamonds, they ought to ask, has this got the Kimberley certificate? Has it been certified by that? But I think there's still flaws in those.
Who would you have doing the certification? Because is it going to be pardon?
Oh,
okay, yeah. So yeah, this is the company's view. Go on.
I found this, we were looking to see if we could find a quote from a company, and it was actually quite easy to find this one, which is from Nestle. I mean, it's from quite a while ago, so things have improved with Nestle, but this is what the chief executive at the time said. He said, Nestle is not the owner of any plantation. In basically a civil war situation, there might be a lot of other human rights abuses, even worse than the ones that have just been picked up on. It would be even worse to the Ivory Coast if Nestle bought nothing. So it's an interesting... going against what I said, I think in some cases they are very aware of where the chocolate is coming from, but as we've said before, it actually for the Ivory Coast, the chocolate industry is very important, so child labour is obviously horrific, but do you think that the industry would collapse if it was, because obviously these people aren't well off, so I think you're right, tackling poverty is probably the best.
Because we had the talk yesterday, said that there was a boycott of Nestle, and it did so many bad things for human trafficking, especially of children, because more children were trafficked because they had to try and find work, and in some cases this is the only way these kids can work, and this is the only way that these families can get money. So in some cases they're not trafficked, they're not into slavery, they're actually there to work and earn legitimate money. It's just finding which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't, because in some countries child labour isn't a bad thing. Obviously to us, us Westerners, it seems bad because kids should be in education for us. But in a certain country, that's their culture, that's the way that they have to live. So we have to sort of be sympathetic towards that, as well as saying, well yeah, if they're trafficked, if they're put into slavery, that's bad. But if they're there because otherwise they'd be in sex slave, for example, then this is a better option.
I guess
the conditions definitely need to be improved for the workers, whether they're earning money or not. Something needs to be done about the conditions they're forced to work. I mean, I've just saw on here that Ali lived in a 24 by 20 feet room with 18 other slave workers. So I think there is a lot that can be done, whether the countries agree with child labour or not, to improve the conditions of the child labourers.
On the, we probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but the US State Department estimated that 10,000 trafficked children are working in the Ivory Coast on in cocoa production, but they also think that 109,000 are there are getting paid and it's child labour. But obviously they disagree with both because they see child labour as unforgivable, especially as they're using really machetes and stuff to break open the cocoa beans and everything. So is child labour ever acceptable?
Yes.
I think, from us who were at the talk yesterday, from anti-slavery, it's kind of only the exploitation of it that we should really see as the bad thing. If there are countries, which there are many in the world, where families are so poor that their only chance of survival and of having food on their table or money to go and buy food is for children to also joining the workforce, if there are adequate protections in place, if they are able to go to school half the time and work half the time, if they don't go and work until maybe they're a bit older, sort of 14, 15. I mean, in this country, you are legally able to work at 14. I mean, and it wasn't that long ago that people were working, you know, if you think of our grandparents' generation, people left school at 12, 13, and so I don't think putting our sort of high and mighty Western views on mostly African and Asian and South American states and saying what you're doing is, you know, immoral and we really disagree with it, because then you're not going to have a good dialogue and say, okay, actually the better way to go about it is saying, we understand that you maybe are in these desperate situations and that children might need to work, which is something that we wouldn't like, but we understand that has to happen. But let's put some mechanisms and protections in place to make sure that they're not exploited and that they are paid for their labour and that they aren't working in awful conditions.
So someone said that chocolate companies should be the ones that kind of soldier the burden of trying to solve this issue of human trafficking. Does anyone have any suggestions about how on earth they could do that?
If I did, I'd work for the UN. I think fair trade and stuff like that is definitely a good step, because obviously companies have to pay a certain amount of money to Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance for the certification, but also because that stuff funds inspectors and people to fly out there and actually check out these plants and plantations, which is good. But also I think, unfortunately, whilst the Nestle man tried to palm off any blame, he's actually revealed that he said if Nestle bought nothing, Ivory Coast would suffer. But he's managed to show how powerful Nestle can be in Ivory Coast by saying that he has such sway over how that country operates that if you really wanted to, if all of a sudden Nestle threatened, right, we're not going to buy your cocoa, I'm pretty sure the Ivory Coast government would move quite fast and would possibly think of ways to tackle trafficking, but clearly there's no incentive, because if the companies keep buying it and there's still employment and there's tax money for the government, then I imagine they're not really fussed.
That brings us quite well onto our next slide that we prepared.
I need to
Yeah, do you want to run?
Sorry guys. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'll
So-
take some good chocolate. Take some good chocolate. Thank you very much and good job with the week. It's been really good.
So, can the governments do anything about it? What would you suggest? I mean, the Malian government can't even control half of the country. It's been overrun by the Taliban. The Côte d'Ivoire government has a very limited budget, a very limited scope to do anything about it. So what can the governments do? If you say that it should be the governments that should change this, what can they do?
Well, you've got response. This is coming from I've just been doing research for my dissertation. It comes under the responsibility to protect doctrine. That if a government is unable to protect its citizens, and if a government is unable and unwilling to protect its citizens, it should be the job of the international community to step in. And obviously, as you've said, the Mali government has been overrun. The Ivory Coast government has a very short, small budget. So they are obviously unable to tackle it, and whatever they will do, you can't have any guarantee that it will be implemented. So, in my view, I believe that it's the job of the international community to step in and say we need to have a sort of trade agreement in which these measures need to be taken in order for us to trade with you.
Like insist on certain regulations.
Yeah, because obviously
Like
The
minimum
thing is,
standards, agreements.
I watched the BBC Panorama documentary and they went into farms undercover and then they started asking, you could tell that the owner of the farm would be getting quite defensive about it. And then the situation was like, oh no, he's not a slave, he's my nephew and he's my cousin's son and everything like that. And so when birth records are so patchy, is there a way to actually prove it? Even the international community may be powerless when they go into those farms and have someone claiming that it's their relative.
You need to have someone who's sympathetic towards the culture. You can't just have any old person. They need to be trained, not trained, but you need to be they just have knowledge about that culture and about that country. Because if a person wants to do good, the problem is that they can actually do more harm if they go in with their ideas, their own ideas, and not like work with these people. Because obviously their main export is cocoa, and you can't just go in and be like, okay, all children are going into school, we're not doing anything with them. They're not allowed to work on the plantations anymore, because that's just going to completely ruin everything.
Yeah. So do you think international governments have a right to intervene in the domestic affairs of Côte d'Ivoire?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they need them to intervene. Because I imagine if the UN or any international organisation offered to stump up money in order to tackle it, I imagine the Ivory Coast would be definitely willing to listen to what they have to say.
But if they gave them money, like these countries are quite famously corrupt.
Yeah.
There'd have to be like regulations put for the money. That's the whole point. They wouldn't just give money if there weren't certain protocols that they had to follow. Obviously, intervening doesn't just mean militarily. There's so many ways that a state and the international community can intervene in which they can do good. Like, it's obviously not as powerful as military, but we're not. So we're sort of like more suggesting that groups be formed to regulate, because you have regional and sub-regional bodies which can help with like UN and with states in order to regulate what's happening.
So that takes us back to the original question, really. Who is to blame? Who can do something about it?
I don't know if consumers can do.
I think consumers would be willing to do something, but they don't. They A, don't know about it, and B, when you put up a figure that only 3% of cocoa is traffic free, I mean, what can you do about it? If you want a chocolate bar and only 3% of your chocolate bar is going to be traffic free, you can't go and buy 3% of a chocolate bar, because that's just silly. But people could start buying chocolate, but we know that's not going to happen. But they also, there's no guarantees of what is trafficked and what isn't. I mean, fair trade is a good standard, but I remember in the talk yesterday, Michaela from Anti-Slavery said that even on fair trade farms, they found evidence of trafficking. And so there's no guarantees in any sense, so consumers will struggle to do anything, I think.
So, as an economist, I always believe in the power of the consumer, and we're actually in a very powerful position, I guess, because the European community is the world's largest consumer. I'm really shocked that we beat the US, actually, and we account for 30.
More McDonald's than we do.
That must be it. Not enough chocolate, too much McDonald's.
Yeah.
More sugar.
So 39% of the world's total comes to Europe. We eat all of it. So is there anything that we can do? Is there any regulation that they can put in? Maybe make it more like, almost maybe turn it into like a warning, or maybe on the packets like this could be done with, if you legislate in that way.
Or like cigarettes.
Like cigarettes.
Crazy pictures
As
of
a
like
smoker,
mums and
that
stuff.
doesn't work. I can tell you that annoys me more than it like does anything else.
So do you think that you'd be less likely to buy a bar of chocolate if they had like a picture of like that picture, for example?
I think what the consumer is better able to do, and something that might be more effective, because if there was pictures like that on chocolate bars, that might dissuade a few people from buying chocolate, and then they will just do other things with the cocoa.
Then also we come back to the argument about making other people suffer who aren't actually trafficked.
Yeah.
So if you blanket the whole chocolate industry and go, right, look at this, people are trafficked, then people look at the bar and go, oh my gosh, all people who are in the chocolate industry are traffickers or like slavers, and they won't buy it, and then that'll mean Ivory Coast
It's
suffers.
essentially a boycott.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be helpful. I think what would be more helpful is if the consumers are more aware of the situation and they go, okay, we don't want our chocolate to be trafficked, or have any kind of relation to trafficking, and so could, I don't know, write to their MPs or write to the. I think if the EU, if Europe has that huge amount of power. I mean, you were saying about Nestle having a lot of power in the Ivory Coast, but if Europe has a massive proportion of the world's chocolate coming here than if like the European Parliament made some kind of directive and said, okay, well, we can't have chocolate coming into Europe and being sold unless it meets X, Y, and Z criteria, or has been certified as being, you know, whatever, traffic free. And these are the guidelines for something to be traffic free. I don't know if that could ever work.
So you think the solution's more EU import, like legislation and red tape then? And you don't think that would harm the Ivory Coast?
Well, that would cost us a lot of money in terms of how much the chocolate will cost, so people won't buy it anyway. Like, if you had all that red tape, like, chocolate would cost
I
like
think that's just the lawyer in me.
Legislate at all costs.
Yeah, always.
Did someone want to say something?
Sorry,
Had,
yeah.
like,
Oh no, it's fine.
okay.
I was just thinking of that because I'm not sure about the figures, but I was wondering, compared to fair trade chocolate, how many people buy Nestle and Cadbury's and Toblerone? So because fair trade is a little bit more, does that mean that, you know, in the end, like you say, consumer is king? So if we stop buying perhaps Toblerone and start buying fair trade, although they're not perfect, will that make a huge difference and encourage other companies to have a fairer trade attitude?
Yeah, maybe rather than boycotting chocolate in general, you would boycott the worst offender, which at the moment is Mondelez and Toblerone.
That's what they did with Nestle. That's what Nestle, before they were fair trade, that's what happened. And a lot more children were trafficked. Like, you could say that obviously coming with a perspective like that, obviously in an ideal world that would help. But you've got to think that these kids are already trafficked into that industry. So if you give them less work, they're going to be trafficked into something else that's probably much worse. Like the girls that work on there, they're there because, so they're not trafficked into the sex trade. But if there's no work for them, then they're going to get trafficked into the sex trade. So it's the horrible other side of the coin. So you've got to think of other ways other than boycotting.
But ultimately, it forced Nestle to change for the good.
Yeah.
But then it was at the live at the.
But then
You've got to think of the lives of the kids that
but
were.
then they're already bad.
Yeah, but then you're making them worse.
But
There's
it's hard to find a way to make it's the kind of, you're dragging at strings. So do you either like boycott chocolate or make all these rules and then the trade will inevitably suffer, or do you let it continue as it is where people are suffering already
And tolerate more kids being trafficked
Yeah.
into Cote d'Ivoire to work.
Because I think whatever happens, it's going to be hard, and more than one person is going to suffer in this supply chain. But ultimately, it's for a longer term goal, I think.
Should we look at as well at how to prevent children from being in this situation, perhaps preventing them from being forced into this, and stopping parents
So
being
back to the
desperate?
parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
that's
just back to
fixing
the
Africa.
poverty and the situation in the countries that they do come from, or in the areas that they come from, that's forced them into really desperate situations.
Yeah, it's more tackling the economic situation in a country. Because if the economic situation is better, then these kids won't have a reason to go out and work. Obviously, that's a massive long-term goal that needs to be tackled. It's not a short-term solution.
But the economic situation in Mali, for example, won't improve until the political one does.
That's the same across unstable countries as well.
Most northern African countries.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that nothing can be done, we're going to have this forever, and
We should never eat chocolate
never
again.
eat chocolate again.
No.
So throw away those plates of yummy chocolate in front of you.
I think, like, this is my personal opinion, I think the best way to do it would be an international government level, because consumers don't know enough, and it would be hard to find a way to kind of, for them to shape their decision in what they buy. It's not as clear as fair trade. Like, people can make a clear choice about that, but trafficking is so hard to spot.
Yeah.
I think the best way to do it would be, I think if the UN could set up a special trafficking group, and not only would there be government participants, but also participants from the companies that actually buy the cocoa. Because I think you have to understand why they do it, and how they do it, and you need their input in it, because obviously you want to know what the economics is going to be. I know it sounds rough, but that's how they think. And so I think that would be the best thing, personally.
The UN Society Chair suggested that the UN should have more responsibility. What would we think of next? So apparently this is what we can do. So join Stop the Traffic website, get the word out there basically. So only purchase certified chocolate, so not necessarily fair trade, but Rainforest Alliance or something else. We kind of edited out these points on their website. They suggested you check their website before you buy any piece of chocolate to see which one it is, but we didn't really want to plug the website. And just tell people, because it's not going to change unless people want it to, really. So that's everything. Thank you very much.
Good.
I'll tell now you that.
What do you think we should do?
Yeah.
Me personally, I'm not sure actually.
The
Until
Traffic website's a really good one actually if anyone wants to have
They've
it.
recently
They've
updated
got-
it as well,
they've
so
got
it's really
loads
easy
of
to use.
resources and they've made a bit of a focus on the chocolate and the cocoa campaign.
yeah, until Pete strong-armed Amy and me into doing this talk, after very carefully reminding us that he had done such a good job in our control answers last term, I knew virtually nothing about chocolate, and I really read up on it and everything. And it's just amazing how deeply entrenched it is, because it's something that I had no idea about, really. You wouldn't even think, when you told me I was going to, Human Trafficking Week was going to have a talk in chocolate, I was like, am I going to give out recipe ideas? Is it going to help the children in some way? So I really couldn't think of how it was related, and it's just shocking how entrenched it is, basically. And I think it will take a long time to change it, and it's just whether you want to like make people's lives miserable now to improve them in the future, or improve other people's lives.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult thing, and I don't think it will change until Mali stabilises and Côte d'Ivoire stops seeming like such an attractive place to send your children.
Yeah.
Also, it would be important to highlight that chocolate is by no means the only thing that's the subject of trafficking.
Yeah.
We have a map actually down the front which takes some examples of countries and all of the goods and items that have been known to have elements of trafficking involved in them, and it's got everything from chocolate to wood to bricks to cotton
Mobile
to
phones.
yeah, prostitution. Yeah, the mineral they use in electronics from Congo.
Pete, come on up here and tell us all what you want us to do then. Have you got a petition or something you can all sign?
No.
There's various things on the Human Trafficking Awareness Week page on Facebook, which I'm assuming most of you have seen if you're here tonight, and thank you for liking it. There are lots of links to things, but I think we can sort of repost things so that they're near the top. And there's quite a few websites that are and organisations that are focusing on this issue.
I mean, if you can do just one thing, it would be to tell your friends, because the chances are they have no idea. I was telling mine today actually, and he genuinely had not a clue where his chocolate came from. And I told I told someone, I was like, oh, Toblerone's not good because it's subject to trafficking. He went, but yeah, isn't that made by the Swiss? It's like, yeah. But, you know, and also...
Made by the Swiss, owned by an American company with chocolate from the Ivory Coast.
It's got to be good. But I reckon the main thing you can do is just stop buying Toblerone.
He said after coming with a shopping bag full of it.
It was so Alex could crack out the point about you having blood on your hands, basically.
But it's more just raising awareness. That's what we were trying to do. Because if you know more about it, then you can do something. Because obviously, we can't, from sitting here, we can't really do much except tell you about it.
Because I've repeated this fact over the week, but you all know about drug smuggling, right? Easy stuff, you know, everyone reports about it. But
sex trafficking.
yeah,
Most people have heard of like the exploitation into prostitution.
Human trafficking is the second largest form of international crime in the world, and it makes more than McDonald's every year in profits. It makes apparently it makes $32 billion every single year, and that's more profit than McDonald's pulls in 2 years. So, and there's also reports I don't know how reliable they are, but people are switching their cargo from drugs to people because it's easier to get away with it and the prison sentences are shorter. So in lots of countries, if you traffic humans, you'll get a shorter prison sentence than if you traffic cocaine. And that's quite shocking. And that's why we're basically having this week, because no one really knows about it. It's never talked about. And we wanted to change that, really.
Yeah. We have lots of resources if you want to come. Do you have all the things from anti-slavery?
Oh, all of their...
Yeah, leaflets.
No.
Okay.
Okay, we don't have that many resources.
They're all on the internet. Anti-slavery, stop the traffic. If you just go on our page, there's lots and lots and lots of things that you can look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about one.
Because we are poor and we can't print things.
Yeah, I think last time we did a week together, you were very happy that the Oxfam Society did all the printing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you very much for coming tonight and putting up with me talking at you for so long. And yeah, I just hope you go home and actually really tell everyone, basically.
And eat your chocolate. Don't feel too guilty.
Yeah.
We bought it now, so...
Yeah.
Because they're not going to get very, very fat this evening.
Yeah, very well.
Does anyone have any questions they want to ask us about it? Or anything they want to bring up?
What about either of our societies or anything?
What societies are you? So it's the United Nations and Oxfam.
And I'm Oxfam, yeah.
Yeah. And Amnesty.
And Amnesty was now.
Yeah.
How do you get involved with your societies?
Oh, like lots of ways. Basically, you can join us. Well, I'm speaking for myself. You can join us any time.
Yeah.
We have membership fees. I don't know what yours is.
I think we're better value than you are personally.
Just like any student society, you unfortunately have to pay to become a member, but sometimes there's lifetime membership for certain societies.
And we always do stuff that is free for everyone, like this. So we'll always do stuff that for members only, we will. But that's mainly because you have to have the training to do it and stuff. But like, we'll make most of our events public because we don't really care about the money as such. We just want people to know about things.
Yeah.
And yeah, so for Oxfam we just do random campaigning. We've been campaigning all day today, trying to get people to sign up to our campaign to force George Osborne to do stuff about the budget, basically. But we do a lot of campaigning and a few events and stuff like that. But just like us on Facebook, look for our group, and there's lots of ways to get involved.
Yeah, we both have Facebook pages, so like them, and we update them all the time, but you know, at least 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah, and Twitter and everything. But yeah, we have email addresses if you want to take those down, things like that. Yeah. What?
Just having a bit of a dance down here if everyone's missed it. Has anyone got any other questions or? Cool. Thank you very much.
I want some more chocolate.
Yeah, everyone have this after chocolate.
I wasn't sat next to